Okay, this is retarded, but not for the reasons you think. First of all, this is on the BBC. Like, of course it is. You need to have a corporation that literally steals money from people and has zero accountability in order to be able to publish this shicer. The AI slop is incapable of making articles like this. Like, no one gives a shit about what this expert thinks, but the BBC goes out of their way to present it to the public. Okay? And they're not doing this for ratings or for any other reason. They're doing it as a way of a social justice ceremony. You know, like when you have a preacher in a church talking about God. This is what the BBC is doing. They're getting like a far leftist, a sexologist researcher in order to talk about social justice. Now, here's the interesting part. The guy, despite the fact that they're an expert, they came to this conclusion without making any sort of scientific experiments, without doing any sort of observations. It's literally their opinion. In other words, my cynical Eastern European brain believes that any type of drooling retard that has an opinion, as long as they're left-leaning and they have like some form of nepotism and connection to the BBC, they too can appear in the papers. Like, it's fucking wild, isn't it? So, complete waste of anyone that's idiotic enough to pay the BBC license. Like, this is where your money is going. Secondly, is the idea that experts are actually smarter than normal people. In a world where the experts would have to abide by the scientific theory, that would be correct, right? So they would have to do observation, an experiment, and then if other people can reproduce that experiment, it becomes truth. But this is not what's happening. Apparently, being an expert in Britain is like going to a place, a university, where they hand diplomas like candies. It's like an expert for you and an expert for you, and then you become an expert, and you're kind of like the priesthood. Like, what you say cannot be falsifiable, even though, as I mentioned in the beginning, it is purely retarded. So, what is this person saying? This person is saying that maybe you should ask babies for consent when you change a nappy. And they admit that it sounds stupid, and they admit that, well, I mean, the baby isn't going to understand what you're saying. But, you know, it's the body language. It's this thing where you ask the baby a question and you give time for the baby to answer. Okay, first and foremost, if they were a genuine pediatrician, they would probably know that at that age, especially the picture, the thumbnail that they show here, the baby barely even sees the parent. Okay? Secondly, let's assume this for just a fraction of a second. Let's assume that you're asking the baby, like, do you want the nappy changed? And you're allowing the baby time so that they feel comfortable. What if the baby doesn't want the nappy changed and then you change it anyway? Like, is that like raping the baby? Because that's where, you know, like social justice is about. It's like anything without consent, even if it's not sexual, it's rape. No. I completely like disagree with this technique. Like, first of all, it's actually important for the baby to understand are never going to be consensual. This is called instilling discipline in the child, and changing the nappy happens to be one of those things. Like, no sensible parent should ever give a flying fuck if the baby wants or doesn't want a nappy change. In fact, if the baby is crying or is trying to run away and doesn't want the nappy change, tough shit, the change is going to happen. Let's be honest, you know, this idea that you need to parent children and always, every single time, ask for consent if a child wants to or not, that's not good parenting. That's raising a spoiled asshole. Sure, you know, like sometimes when the kid wants something, it's reasonable, right? Like if the kid wants something reasonable, like for instance, it's dinner time and he is crying because he is hungry, then obviously you have to feed the baby. If the water is too hot and he is crying because the water is burning, then obviously you're going to make sure that the water is of a correct temperature. These are reasonable things. But sometimes the baby can cry because of unreasonable things. Like, for example, my son was playing with the electric socket. I moved him in another room. He started crying because he wanted to go back to the electric socket. That's not negotiable. I'm not going to become the slave of my child because he wants to play with the electric socket. If my child decides to take a shit and the diapers are full, I don't care if he wants to play, the diapers are going to be changed, right? But what the social justice experts say is that no, the parent should actually become a slave to the child. And this has roots in neo-Marxist ideology, revolutionary Marxist ideology, where they're basically considering that children are enlightened. This is why children should be able to transition. This is why Greta Thunberg was the smartest child in the world. You get to see this with the Chinese Cultural Revolution. It's the same concept, right? Like the new generation is wiser than the older generation. And so the Marxist academics, they actually talk about liberating children. In other words, exactly what I mentioned before, right? Like children having the ability to transition. They know better than the parents. Parenting is actually oppressive. The teacher is the second parent. I'm pretty sure like most of you that follow the news have heard most of this nonsense, which is extremely unhealthy. And I'm sorry to say this, but like, yes, like parents do own their children. And there was like this BBC articles back in the day saying that claiming that parents own their children is like slavery. But no, that's not the case. The idea that the parent is the guardian and responsible for the child stems from the fact that there is a biological component and most parents do love their children. And so like most parents are going to protect their children. And the parent-children relationship is not one that's always built off consent. Because sometimes nap time is at nap time. Sometimes they have to do homework when they have to do homework. It's called discipline. It doesn't matter if the child doesn't consent to do homework. He's going to do the fucking homework. Doesn't matter if the child doesn't want to eat the vegetables and he's not consenting. He's going to eat the vegetables, right? Like we all went through that. Our children are going to go through that as well. And if some Marxist professor gets ass hurt, it is what it is. But they're trying to point this into the realm of child abuse. Like, unless you're a parent that does everything at any moment that the child wants, you're abusive. And so, the child requires liberation. This is why the BBC is doing this. It's normalizing the idea that consent should happen in every situation, even when you change the nappy. Now, if you actually want to live in that world, right? Like if you generally think that the parent-baby relationship is one of equality, then okay, let's assume that the baby doesn't want the nappy to be changed. He's not consenting. I don't consent to be next to a stinking baby, right? And so like I can just take the baby and put him out of the house, right? Because I don't consent to him being in my house anymore. Where is the wrongness, right? Like, where would I be incorrect in that? Because I would be living in a world where there is no parent-baby relationship. Like, we're both equals, right? Like, it's equality. And so, it's my house, not his. He doesn't want to consent with changing the nappy. I get to place him outside, right? Like, I don't consent staying next to someone that smells of shit either. But it sounds retarded because it is, right? Like, the relationship between a parent and a baby is not equal. And it should never be equal. In fact, if it was equal, it actually would be harmful. But like, there is no comment section here. There is no way to contradict this expert. And I have a feeling that this expert doesn't have kids of their own. It's such an idiotic thing. Now, is it wrong to like ask children questions and to teach them about consent? Absolutely not. But you don't have to do that with diapers, right? Like, you can teach children about consent when, for example, you're offering him something to drink. And you ask, like, do you want water? My 2-year-old son knows how to nod, and he knows how to say yes. If he doesn't want water, he shakes his head, knows how to say no. That's how you teach children about consent. And you don't need an expert in order to come in and give you the playbook. Most parents figure this out for themselves. The fact that the BBC is actually humoring this, or that Australia ABC News also humored this, is beyond ridiculous. It's just maddening. And it's like, okay, so like these experts, are they paid from taxpayer money, and do they have like nothing else to do? Like, is this what they do in their daytime? Is this their job? This is the product, the fruits of their labor? How interesting. Let me know what you guys think. And as usual, I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.